got a question for you guys. What is the best Disney attraction ever made? The usual suspects are probably coming to mind. The Haunted Mansion, Spaceship Earth, Kilimanjaro Safari, Tower of Terror, so on and so forth. If you picked any of those, then I'll have to disagree with you. When I think of the best Disney ride, one that delivers on all of its promises and leaves you with a thrilling, memorable, and even moving experience, one word comes to mind. Soarin'. In the 2 decades since it opened, and yes, it really has been 20 years, it cemented its status as a classic and a staple of Disney theme parks all over the world. But what about it makes it so singularly universal and loved? Well, buckle in that safety belt, store your carry-on items, and hold on to those handrails for dear life if you hate heights as much as I do, as we learn about it together. The attraction's genesis came in 1996 when Disney's California Adventure was in the early stages of development. Originally called Ultra Fright, this attraction was meant to simulate the feeling of hang gliding over California. The state has a long and proud tradition of aviation, so it only seemed natural to include it in the upcoming park. Hopes were quickly dashed when Imagineers couldn't figure out how to do it. Sure, they'd done simulators before, with stuff like Star Tours and Body Wars, but nothing to this scale. The early attempts at modeling the attraction proved to be physically impossible to produce, and very costly at the same time. How do you get guests in the air, and how do you keep them there? And how do you do that without it being a capacity nightmare? Luckily, a solution did come along, courtesy of Imagineer Mark Summer. He came up with a model using an old erector set, some string, and a hand crank. It works kinda like a ski lift. 3 rows of seats are lifted up using a cantilever. Once everyone is buckled in, the cantilever lifts all 3 rows up into the air and pushes them forward towards the screen. To help heighten the immersion, they are articulated to lean back and forth to match the movements of the film. So not only could you get people in the air and keep them there, but you could also get a lot of guests in there at the same time. Disclaimer, I am not an engineer, so I could be bungling up this whole explanation. The accompanying film was projected onto a concave screen. Because the ride vehicles are placed right in the middle of it, they are completely immersed in artseeing the edges of the screen. Unless you're one of those sad sacks sitting on the far end rows, I guess. The film itself was shot in IMAX HD at 45 frames per second, which was pretty state-of-the-art for the time. A lot of it was filmed from a helicopter, with a camera dangling from the end of it, cataloging famous locations in the Golden State, including but not limited to Napa Valley, Tahoe Lake, LA, Malibu, Yosemite Falls, and much more. Some of the locations proved to be a total nightmare to film. Not even because of any perils, but because of securing permissions to film there. It took over a year to secure permits for some places due to environmental concerns. Not to mention that most of the people and effects you saw in the film were done practically. So, people had to wait hours for a helicopter to pass by and do their motion. And if they messed up, then you had to wait even longer to try it again. It was a huge pain in the ass, to put it mildly. But it was worth it. To really bring the experience home, it needed a soundtrack. Something big and grand. So they called upon a composer named Jerry Goldsmith to do the duty. Goldsmith was a legendary film composer and an incredibly prolific one at that. If you're any kind of movie fan, you've heard at least one of his scores. Perhaps you've heard of this? What about this? Maybe even this? Yeah, that was all him. Also, he did some music for some sci-fi thing you've probably never heard of. This was late in his career, and he passed away only 2 years after the attraction opened. But he clearly hadn't lost his touch. His score for Sorin is one of his best, easily standing toe-to-toe with his film scores. Any person will tell you that the music is a huge part in what makes Sorin work. Reportedly, after previewing the attraction, Goldsmith came down from the ride in tears. This was a dream project combining 2 of his biggest passions, music and flight. As a child, he even flew in hang gliders with his father in the LA dunes. He jokingly told the ride operators that he would have done the project for free. Soarin' over California opened in February of 2001 with the rest of Disney California Adventure, and it was an immediate hit. DCA's opening year was by all accounts, a hot mess, and Sorin was the only attraction that was universally praised by guests. Quick little story, the only time I have been to DCA was right after it opened, so I got to experience all that shit firsthand. I couldn't even ride Sorin because I was too short, so I was stuck riding Superstar Limo. And to think you wonder why I only talk about Disney World on this channel. But after its opening, guests begged Disney to bring the attraction to Walt Disney World. Keep in mind, most people who go to Disney World only go to Disney World. They don't really ever visit Disneyland. But the buzz and hype around this attraction was so big that they wanted a chance to experience it themselves. So, in 2005, as a part of the happiest celebration on Earth, the people got their wish, and Sorin was brought to Florida, finding a home in the Land Pavilion at Epcot, replacing Food Rocks. Sorin at Epcot had to change some things to fit with the new setting. Instead of going on a tour of California while we're already there, this time we're traveling to California. So, the queue is themed to be more of an airport. It's a lot more streamlined and modern than the rustic airfield of the previous version. There's also interactive games in the queue to keep guests occupied while they wait. This version was similarly a big hit, and even 16 years later, the ride still sees wait times of up to 70 minutes on any given day. 2 more incarnations of Sorin have opened in the meantime, both going in completely different directions with the theming. Soaring Over the Horizons opened with the rest of Shanghai Disneyland in 2016. This story is centered on the Adventure Isle storyline that existed within the park. We're entering an Arbori temple, who are a group of indigenous people who live in the area. It is a celestial observatory dedicated to the deity Qatar, who is said to take the form of a thunderbird. We use the power of the Qatar to go on a flight around the world. Soarin' Over the Horizon would also be the first version of the attraction to use the newer film, which would be exported to both Epcot and DCA as Soarin' Around the World. The most recent incarnation opened at Tokyo Disney Sea in 2019 as Sorin' Fantastic Flight. This is located in the Mediterranean harbor section of the park, at the Museum of Fantastic Flight. The museum is showing off Da Vinci-style flying machines, which were the brainchild of one Camelia Falco. It also ties into the greater Society of Explorers and Adventurers storyline that exists at every Disney theme park all over the world. Honestly, there's probably enough there with Soarin' Fantastic Flight that could make for its own video, so that'll be a story for another day. But this marks 4 different versions of the same attraction. But aside from the changes in aesthetics and settings, it's still the same. They play the same exact movie, aside from 1 or 2 scenes that are different. Ride incarnations change 1 or 2 things, some new characters, some new scenes, a cute gimmick, or even an entirely different take on the ride format. But no matter the fancy reskin, the ride is the exact same thing. What is it about Sorin that makes it so universal? Why do we keep coming back to it? I think it has something to do with the simplicity. You don't need any kind of context to enjoy the ride experience. You don't have to know a thing about California or the airfield the ride takes place in to enjoy it. It kind of just speaks for itself. As much as I enjoy story-heavy rides with lots of little details to analyze and get invested in, a little goes a long way. Plus, with no dialogue to translate, it's something that can be enjoyed by anyone. It's not confined to the boundaries of language. So, say, for families who come to the parks who don't speak much English, it's something they can enjoy too. And it makes it a lot easier to export to other parks. Anyone who's worked in localization will tell you that there's a lot to consider when it comes to translating things for another culture. Those considerations don't really apply to Sorin. It's an experience anyone can enjoy, no matter where they're from. And overall, I think that explains its continued popularity. It has a simple premise anyone can enjoy and executes it extremely well. Not every ride has to have an incredibly detailed backstory or some kind of thought-provoking message behind it. Simplicity speaks for itself, and it's why Sorin has lasted for as long as it has. And why it will continue to do so for many years in the future. And that concludes the video. Now I'll pass the question on to you. What do you think of Sorin? Which version is your favorite? Do you think it's one of the best rides? Whatever you're thinking, let me know down in the comments. But that's all the time I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.